Hey there, FileMaker learners. This is Matt Petrowski here at ISO FileMaker Magazine. You're on my desktop, and today we're taking a look at repeating fields. If you don't know everything there is to know about repeating fields, then stick around. We're going to learn about them. Alrighty, repeating fields, that's what we're going to be learning about today. And if you'd like to follow along, which I hope you do as a FileMaker learner, I'm going to give you all of the insights that I can about repeating fields. And the reason that I don't just start building a solution, and I've been doing weeks and weeks of here's FileMaker's environment, and here's all the fields, here's calculations, here's how you learn this. If you don't have the fundamentals when you're trying to learn FileMaker, it's much more difficult to build exactly what you want. So let's start off with creating a file. Now, I've already created one, but you're going to choose a new solution for today's video because we're going to simply just be adding some repeating fields. Now, I called my file quite aptly repeating fields. And in this video, the cool thing is we're going to be learning where and how repeating fields are valuable. Now, the first thing I'll tell you is that repeating fields go all the way back to when FileMaker was first released, all the way back to before I even started using it. There were a few versions. I started at FileMaker 2. And repeating fields were really the only way to store multiple pieces of information that were somewhat the same. Say, for example, you had multiple price points for a given product. So let's easily add a repeating field to our database and see how easy it actually is. So I'm going to open up the defined database. A little wide on the window here. I'll make that smaller. We'll go to the tables, double click on my repeating table, and we're just going to create a field in this database. I'm just going to call it repeat. And you can see that I actually, in my file, I already have two fields. You're not going to have these fields, of course, but I'm going to show you, and I will make this file available, or this technique, where repeating fields are actually valuable. So stay tuned and you'll find out what these fields do, aside from the fact that they read calendar date. So let's just make our own repeating field, and we'll just call it repeat. Do that right there. The repeating field, we're going to make that a text type right there, and we are going to create it. Now, the first time when you create a field, that field is not a repeating field. It's just a single field, and each record will have that field able to store one piece of information. When you double-click the field in order to access the options, which we took a look at, in the storage section, where we talked about the global storage versus non-global, we've talked about maximum repeats. These are all covered in previous videos. Go ahead and look for those. This is the place where you can set the number of repetitions. Now, the first thing that I'll tell you is that the number of repetitions that you set has absolutely no impact to the size or the structure of your database. It doesn't matter if I put 1 or if I put 10, 100, or 1,000. All this is saying to FileMaker is I want to reserve a number of repetitions that I can actually use. So in our example that we'll see here coming up for a calendar, we really only need 42 repetitions, so I was able to specifically set those 42. But if you're going to use repeating fields for some particular feature or technique that you put into the database, the number isn't as necessary in terms of being small. In other words, it doesn't matter if I wanted to build a calendar and I had 42 or if I had 100. If I only used 42 out of the 100, it's no cost to me. So let's just make this one 10, and we will say okay. Now, FileMaker is going to use this little way to indicate that it's a repeating field. And this becomes very important to recognize because this is the exact same way that you're going to get information out of a repeating field if you're going to actually store information in a repeating field. It's using these brackets. So let's take a look at the repeating field on the layout. As I scroll out here and we zoom out and say okay, that field will be put onto the layout. We will go into layout mode with a Command or Control L if you're on Windows. Now, FileMaker has already put this repeating field in a format where it's now horizontal. And as I scroll this down, that repeating field shows me all of the repetitions. And I can, of course, put anything that I want on them. Well, let's look in the inspector, see how we can change this up. We can go over to the fourth area of the inspector, the Data tab. And that's where we are going to have this section right here of show repetitions. Now, this is a really neat thing to know about with regards to FileMaker because it allows you to do some really cool things. For example, if I can start at a different offset, and that's what they call it, I can show side by side a number of items. So what we're going to do is this option right here allows us to actually set the orientation. So we can set it to display vertically or horizontally. You can see FileMaker defaulted to horizontally. Well, I'm going to say I want this vertically, and there we go. Wonderfully, it shows me 1 through 10. Now again, like I said, with these repetitions, I get to choose when it starts and where it stops, and how many I'm going to show. So clearly I'm showing all 1 through 10 of my particular solution here. But let's say, for example, I have an exact copy of this. Now I'm holding down the Option key as I drag this. It's going to prompt me over here for the name of the field. Let me just zoom out, and we'll zoom in again right there. So I can always specify the field. In this case, I really don't like this option of create label, so I'm going to uncheck that and say OK. So I now have 2 repetitions side by side, and what makes this really nice, as I zoom in again and we scroll in to see all of our options, is that I can control these. So let's say, for example, with this first one, I want to see only 1 through 5. And then with it right next to it, I want to see 6 through 10. So what we've done now is we've taken advantage of FileMaker's repetition, which essentially acts like an array, or just anything that's common. For example, you wouldn't, in today's modern database, you wouldn't store multiple price points for a product using a repeating field. This is a very, very important thing to recognize as a FileMaker new learner. You are going to use a related table. You're going to use multiple tables in order to store multiple price points. That's the proper way to structure something. But knowing about these repetitions for the purpose of display or for cool widgets is what's really cool to know. So if I say, for example, didn't want this first one, of course I would delete that off the field, or off of the layout, excuse me. We'll go into browse mode and we will see that we can put, well, we're getting FileMaker's prompt that we have no records. Let's go ahead and do that with Command or Control N. And now I can put whatever I want. Gosh, the best example I have in my head is price points. And I'm going to go quickly into layout mode and I'm going to resize these. Notice that I selected both of those at the same time in order to resize them both rather than grabbing one and resizing it. It's a much faster way to do things. So 505, and let's say 467, and then I'm going to skip one on purpose, and then 304. So I suggest you do the same. So what we want to know is, let's pretend that we had a script or something and we wanted to display something in this nice side-by-side format. Now, trust me, when you're going to actually store your data in a related table, you can do the same thing with portals as well. So most of what we're learning here with repeating fields also works with portals. You get to choose what you want to start to display, how many you want to display, and then do an offset. But with repeating fields, we need to know how we can actually get FileMaker data out of those fields in order to use them for calculations, or in order to do calculations themselves, calculations on the repeats themselves. So that's what we're going to look at right here. So the first thing we need to do is I'm going to use FileMaker Advanced here. If you do not have a copy of FileMaker Advanced, you will not have these options of a script debugger, debugging controls, and data viewer. Please try to get FileMaker Advanced. It makes it so much easier to actually learn FileMaker. All right, so scrolling off a little bit here, I'm going to create a new watch variable. Watch variable is where you can watch or basically look at anything that you want to see in FileMaker, using FileMaker Advanced, that is. And let's scroll this a little bit smaller so that we can take a look at our expression. Let's see how small I can get this dialog box. That's as small as I can get it. I want to see off screen here. So as long as you recognize that I'm using this automatically evaluate, I really don't care about seeing these functions over here currently, but we will be taking a look at them. So let's say, for example, I want this 467. I want to grab that one value. Now, if I double click my repeat field right here, FileMaker is always going to return the very first value of a repetition. We can see right there, 505. Now, there's two ways to actually get a particular value from a repeating field. So we'll go over here and we will take a look at our functions by type. I regrouped them, and we are going to look at this option right here, our repeating functions. Now, there's only a few of them, and we will scroll that. You can see that there's really only 3 of them, and one of them is this one right here, get repetition, specify the repeating field, and specify the number. This one we're also going to be learning about the extend function. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use that function right there. I'm going to delete that field and I'm going to say get repetition. FileMaker is going to enter that for me. And what is the repeating field that I want to supply? I want the repeating field. What is the number of the repeat that I want? Well, I want the second repetition, so I'm going to put in number 2. And there we go. I've been able to now extract out of this repetition this $4.67. But wait, there is another way to do that. Remember, just a little bit ago, I mentioned that you can use those brackets. So there's a shorthand version of this. Now I'm going to use comments in order to comment this code out, and it's a double slash in order to comment this code, and hopefully that it will evaluate here. It's going to return the literal string because it's still a comment. What it's actually going to evaluate is this second method. I can actually specify the field itself directly. You can see that the result is the first repetition. Use those brackets. So if I do bracket number 2 bracket, notice that I get 467. If I want to get the third version, the third repetition, that's going to be empty because it's empty right there. If I get the fourth repetition, then it gets me 304. So I prefer to use the shorthand version of this in order to actually work with values. Now here's where we're going to make a little bit of a sidetrack off of repeating fields. We'll be coming back to this because this nomenclature, this naming system that this way that FileMaker uses in order to grab things also works with variables. So this is a key takeaway from this video that you hit way later in your development career, but as a learner, I want you to know it starting right off the bat. I'm going to do something a little bit tricky right here. First off, well, I'm in the data viewer, which is fine. I'm going to use a let function. Now, if you watched a previous video in this series talking about the first function that I think everybody should learn, which is the let function, the let function allows me to declare variables. And I'm going to do that right here in the data viewer, temporarily allowing me to create a variable. I'm going to say let, and I'll just call it, it's going to be a global, this equal 1, and I'm going to say false. I don't need a result. Now I'm going to comment this out as well. Now what happens is the way that the let function works, go watch the video, is I've just set a global variable named this equal to the value of 1, and I've set it to false. Now what I'm going to do, this is the cool part, is I'm going to specify the second repetition of this is also equal to 1. Now this is a very important thing to recognize right here, what I've just done. The fact that the way that FileMaker's repeating fields work is the same way that variables work, and you can do this with local variables and with global variables. The reason I'm doing a global variable right here is because it will persist. A local variable only exists for as long as the calculation is being evaluated or as long as the script is running. After that, it goes away. Global variables persist as long as the file is open. When you shut it down, it goes all global variables go away. So when I monitor this, and in the data viewer, we switch over to the current, look at that. That's a good piece of FileMaker knowledge, is knowing that if I'm going to store a lot of the same pieces of information, knowing that I can both do it in a repeating field, where it can actually be saved into the database, unless I made that repeating field a global field. Go watch the video about global fields. I can do the same thing with global variables. So it's basically just a convenient way to store things and be able to use them, because you're going to be storing things temporarily a lot when you're doing things in FileMaker. You're always creating and then destroying and creating and then destroying things in order to facilitate processes in your FileMaker database. Now, it's very easy to get rid of these. All we have to do is go into our calculation here as this opens, and I can basically say, set this to blank. FileMaker evaluated it, and set this one to blank. FileMaker just evaluated that, and watch. Now it's gone. They don't exist anymore. So I basically just cleared them by setting them to empty. So that was a little diversion there in terms of repeating fields themselves, but it's very worthwhile to actually know. All right, so let's take a look at how we would do FileMaker calculations. We can go ahead and monitor this for right now. How do we actually do FileMaker calculations so that we can have a result based on a repeating field, or how can we have a repeating field use a particular value? So we're going to go into the defined database, and for some reason I'm going to put in a new field, and I'm just going to call it tax. I'm going to switch over here and make it a number field. I'll create that, and we will zoom out. That's going to be put on the layout for us, and we are going to move that up to the top above here so that we can see it with our other information. So tax 0.08. So that is going to be an 8% tax right there. If this was a calculated repeating field, how do we get this one value to apply to all of the repetitions? So what we're going to do is we are going to do a little bit of logic here, or not logic. We're going to basically do some math on this repeating field, but we're going to see that there's one necessary function that anytime that you're dealing with repeats or things that are stored in a repetition, you're going to need to actually apply a particular function, and it is the extend function. So let's go back into the defined database, and we will put, I don't know, I'll just call it amount for some reason. And I'm going to make this a calculation field. And I'm going to create that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're dealing with two different types of fields now. The first field that we're dealing with is this tax number field. We also have our repeat, which we could have made this a number field, which we probably should in this particular case because I'm dealing only with numerical data, but it'll work as a text field. FileMaker will do its own internal coercion for us. So if I'm dealing with a calculation now that is going to reference a repeating field, FileMaker will do a one-to-one analysis when you're dealing with one repeat and another repeat. But as soon as you reference another object that is not a repeating object, you have to use this special function called extend. So down at the bottom, you can see in this calculation, this is where we're going to specify the number of repetitions that are possible. We have to specify at least an equivalent, if we want the same matching number, as what we're referencing. So we created 10 repetitions on the repeat field. We need 10 repetitions on this calculated repeat field. And so what we're going to do is this is going to be a number, but we're going to have to use that extend function. So let's go to those repeat functions, and we're going to say extend. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that it is repeat, I think this will work, times. Now we need to extend this non-repeating field against each repetition. And this should work. And I'm going to do one other thing here. I'm going to choose storage options, and I'm going to choose this option right here. This is making this calculation an unstored calculation, meaning FileMaker, you always have to calculate this. If I left this as a stored calculation, the very first time that data is entered into the repetition field called repeat, FileMaker will store that data, but then it may not, in some cases, it may not update it. It will if you actually change the data, but this unstored option right here, I know that no matter what, FileMaker will always recalculate it. And that's where those calculations can be a little bit bad for your database if you have too many of them. Unstored, that is what I'm talking about. All right, so let's go into layout mode and see if we got what we're looking for. We're going to go and do the same thing that we did with the amount that we did with the first repeat, and we should have our result. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to say I want it vertical. Let's just go ahead and do 5. and then we'll make a copy of that field, and it's say amount. We don't want the label, and we will start at 6 and go up to 10. And so now we should be able to take this field down here below, which wouldn't make sense because we would have it basically be all 10 repetitions, but you get the idea. So you can see right there what we're doing is we're getting the actual tax amount. So 505 is being multiplied times 0.08. If I change it to 0.0875, you can see that it's now 44 cents that we're actually needing to apply. And of course, we will be able to figure that out and do all the math if we wanted to add this to the 505 or what have you. Now you can see that there are these zeros in here. This can all be taken care of with logic, where basically you can say that I could add this in. The hint is I would use if is empty. Then I would return a nothing on this. Well, let's go ahead. We've got the time to do that. Let's go ahead and modify this amount calculation, see how we would do that. So first off, we would say, this might work. If we're going to need let's return. We'll do an if calculation. Our test is, what are we testing for? Is empty. And repeat. Then what do we want to as a result? Well, as a result, we want nothing. And the reason I was hesitant to jump into this is we're doing a little bit more complex calculations here. As a FileMaker learner, hopefully you'll be able to follow along, and we will be able to get this to work. All right, so I'm going to break this down so that it's easier for me to read. And go over, and there we go. And I'm going to do one more thing that is easier for me to read. In the rest of in the rest of computing, the way that an if statement actually works is it's typically this is the way it works in programming. You have if, else, and if. So most of the computer programming world actually works like that. FileMaker doesn't actually have this little else. So if it makes more sense to you, you can follow my example right here of what I've done, and you can actually say, if condition, then do this. Otherwise, here's the else, and you have to put this in a comment. And there's two different ways to comment in FileMaker. There is the double slash of this is a single line comment, or you can do the slash asterisk. This is a multi-line comment. It allows you to add more information into your calculations about your calculations so that you can document them. And we'll talk about commenting and formatting at a bit later date. So hopefully what this will do is it'll say, if the repeat is empty, then give me a blank. Otherwise, repeat and remember to extend across this single field and give me what I want. There we go. So, ta-da! It took care of what we wanted to take care of. So, I think I've done a pretty good job of explaining how FileMaker's repeats work. Now, the last thing I'm going to leave you with regard specifically to repeats, before we take a look at that calendar, is you can use functions across repeats. And those repeats, for example, you can get, let's go to that data viewer again, and we will head into that. Double click, well, let's just click a new value and take a look at that one. And I always like shifting things off to the side so that I can actually see my data behind the scenes as I'm doing things. It really helps me out when I'm developing. So if we look at some of the functions that we have access to, some of them come from this aggregate section. Now, an aggregate is basically when you're going to do something across a range or a bunch of data. For example, find the average, find the count of how many items there are, find the max, the minimum. There is a function that FileMaker has that we actually find in the repeats of the last. So what is the last repeating field? So here's where we're going to play with this. What is the last? What's the repeating field that you want to specify? Well, the last value is 3.04. So I move this off to the side. Yep. That's right. It's right there. All right. How about if we play with those functions? We can get a sum across the repeat field. All right, so there we go. 505.467.304 is 1267. That's good to know. I can do that one. How about the max function? What is the maximum value? Well, out of all of those, the maximum value is 505. What is the min? That one's going to be pretty easy too. Min is 304. So you can see that these become really useful when you're going to come up with particular uses for repeating fields. Again, I'm going to point out that we do not want to use repeating fields for storing our data. Hang in there. We'll get to the point where we're talking about structuring your data and using a related table. But when it comes to features that you want to have, which I'm going to do this really quickly, go into define database, create a date field, make it a date field. I did that with my command keys really quickly, just getting it on the screen so I can throw it up here so that we can compare and contrast what FileMaker gives us versus what we can do in terms of developing, because we now know about repeating fields, is I'm going to set this particular date object to be a drop-down calendar. I'm going to choose to include the icon to show and hide the calendar, and we're going to compare and contrast what FileMaker does versus what I did with repeating fields. So here we have our standard FileMaker date object. I can click in and, of course, type the date, or I can click this little widget and FileMaker's date object or date picker comes up. I have no control over the display of this particular object. There's nothing I can do. FileMaker doesn't give me any styling attributes. It is basically, this is what you get. And sometimes this just doesn't work. Sometimes you want to match the theme or the look and feel of your database, especially on FileMaker Mobile. So what you have to do, and FileMaker's got this nice little formatting. We can see that it's got the actual date is bolded. Any dates that are, well, it's the current day. The date of today is bolded. All the rest of the days of the current month are actually a normal color. And then anything that is outside of the current month is given a light color of gray. Of course, I have my navigation arrows where I can flip through this. I can flip the year as well. Pretty much go wherever I want. So now let's take a look at our pop-up right here. This is cool, because this is accomplished with two fields and one script in order to make a calendar widget very much like FileMaker's, but you get full control over the display. You get to determine what color this is. You get to determine what font you use for the numbers. You get to determine how light or how dark all of these values are. This is when you take control and you program in FileMaker what you want to do. Now, how did I do this with two fields? Well, I did it with a repeating field. This is why you want to know about repeating fields. So basically the way that it works is this, and I'm going to make it available on the FileMaker Magazine website. And this is also, these types of things are things that you can get when you subscribe to my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. But we have a single global date field, meaning that this, as we learned in the global fields video, this is unique to each person running a copy of FileMaker when they're connecting to the database. Everybody can have a different date for their particular calendar widget of what they're using. What is displaying the date is a repeating field. Now, this is scary. This is really scary code, and there is some super complex, crazy stuff that I've done in this particular calculation in order to make this happen. You can see I've got these little special characters, which are basically invisibles, and I'm sort of secretly adding those in order to determine whether it's a day that is outside of the current month versus a day that's inside of the month. If you want to get advanced at FileMaker, study this example. Go through the Lat function that I've created right here, and this is a good way to learn how you can do things in FileMaker and how you can take advantage of certain features like repeating fields in order to do these types of cool things, because this is what makes your solution really pretty cool. Now, if you'd like to use this when I put this on the magazine website, and I'll put a link on this video. In fact, I'll wire it up just after I do this. If you're watching this live, give me some time to get it up. You'll be able to actually use a single script so that when you click any one day, as I click here, you can see what it tells me. The day number is 19th. The month that I detect is the current month. Is it today? No, it's not. What is the date, the ultimate date that you clicked? It's 4/19/2018. And from there, you can pass on the results of this value of this script to any other script. And this is why it's very cool to know about FileMaker's repeating fields, because you can do cool things like this and a bunch of other things. I've seen repeating fields used for the purpose of displaying report data or for all kinds of different things. Remember, not for storing data, but for display purposes and for widgets like this, repeating fields are absolutely awesome. All right, so let's see if we've got any questions. We've hit the 30-minute point, and I don't like to drown you in all kinds of FileMaker. I have got a new way of doing my comments. Hopefully they're larger here. As I switch over, I'll make sure that they come up. Let's bring my comments up, and they go on window right there. See if we got any comments. All right. Morning, HPH group. And in the formatting options, David asked, is there an option to not display if it's 0? There might be. We could take a look at that. Let's switch over to the desktop and see if there is a way to do that. We'll go in, we'll quickly change that amount. We'll get rid of the, here's another good reason to actually know about commenting. Watch how easy it is for me to comment out this code and keep it here. I just add those star repeats right there. Let me zoom in and show you what I'm doing. So I want to keep my old code while I want to test new code. And that new code is basically the old version of the function. This is a key way to actually learn and to work with program. Don't get rid of what you already had. Just keep it there by commenting it out. That way you can go back to it if you need to. So let's go investigate and see if we can find a way to actually display this. And we say, okay, go into browse mode. So our zeros come back. Now we're going to go to the inspector and just see if we can find a way on the field formatting. Any field display formatting is always going to be controlled on this fourth tab, the data tab, all the way down at the bottom. So I'll close field and behavior. And here we are with data formatting. So when it comes to our selection, let's go to, let's see, general, which would be our number. We don't have any options as entered. On fields, we may not be able to. Fixed. There might actually work. So there we have a decimal format option, which it is a decimal format, and we do have this checkbox right here of do not display. Oops, I meant to zoom in a little bit more right there. So let's check it and see if we get our results. And we probably will. So I can probably have, all right, there we go. Excellent. Thank you, David. In FileMaker, there's always a way to solve it typically. Well, I shouldn't say always, but typically a way to solve the problem. So in that case, our learning lesson right there with that one question was, rather than having the more complex logic and having FileMaker actually have to go through the if statement, determine whether or not it should or shouldn't show using the isEmpty, which makes our computation actually take longer, let's just use FileMaker's display option. Use that decimal formatting and set it so that if it's 0, don't display it. Excellent, excellent question and a good solution that we just found right there. All right, heading back to our chat. Let's see what else we've got. When you used the if case statement, why didn't you use the case statement? That's a good question. The if statement, which we'll get into at another time, the if statement allows you to have one result, or it allows you to have two results, but you don't have to have the second result, or the if statement if I accidentally said the case statement. So in this case, I really only had two options that I wanted to return. I either wanted to return nothing or I wanted to return something else. Whereas the case statement allows you to have multiple returns. Anytime you have more than two possible resulting options, that's when you can use the case statement. And we'll go through that in another video. How many text characters can a field repetition actually contain? Another good question, and what I'm going to refer you to is go to FileMaker's specifications. Let's see if I can actually look that up sort of quickly. We'll go in here and we'll search for FileMaker. We will, actually I'll open up a new tab and we will search here for, we're going to search the FileMaker site FileMaker.com, and what we are looking for is field size. And I'm also going to put in specifications because that will actually probably find FileMaker's specifications. As I zoom out, here we go, technical specifications. I am also going to put another in URL qualifier of 16 and see if that finds something. Technical specifications, so easy to find things with Google for FileMaker. Maximum field size. Now within this, I'm going to do a find with Command F. And I'm going to type in field. That's going to highlight all of my field size, and there we're going to have our answer right there pretty quickly. Maximum field size by type. So it really depends on the field size. This may not be the content. Let's go ahead and see if we can find field, number of columns. I don't know. I may be just eating up video time here, but you're going to be able to follow along on the video and look at whatever you want with regards to the content. I think as far as I know, a given field, number of field repetitions, subrecords, 32,000. I don't know. It's a number that you're never going to exhaust in most cases. And a typical FileMaker field, I think, can hold something like 4 gigabytes of data. An insane number. I've shown you the specs here. You're going to be able to do the research. I don't need to dilly-dally on the video and actually spend the time to do that, but I've pointed you in the right location. All right, so I think that was our last question that we had for today. For those of you that are online and live, hey Lee, how's it going? Aha, good to learn repeating fields, have a practical use. Excellent. And here we go. We'll just do this as our final question. Nathan has mentioned in the inspector, when placing a repeating field on the layout, is there a way to change the position options to show the size of each individual block and the size of the whole repeating field? You know what? Good question. I don't like that myself, but I will show you a trick that I use with portals in order to accomplish the same thing. All right, so the question here is, on this layout, as I drag, notice that I'm getting that little tooltip right there. That's an addition that came in later versions of FileMaker. Let's zoom out and let's make sure that we're going to switch to a measurement system that actually makes sense for design. We're going to go to the Position tab, and then here in the measurement system in FileMaker's little inspector, that's what I'm trying to say, we are going to click on the actual measurement value. That's going to toggle through the 3 values that we have in FileMaker of inches, centimeters, and points. Points is pretty much directly equivalent to pixels if you want to think about it that way. That's what's going to tell me as I drag this, the height is 2129. We can see that it's actually snapping. If I hold down the Command key, then it will go 1 point at a time. So this field should be a 21 point field, and in order to double check that, and I can always make a copy or option drag that, go over to the section right there and just specify a value of only show me 1 repetition, and then move back over to the Position tab, and lo and behold, there it is right there for us. It is a 20 point high value. So basically, when we select this, looking here, this will tell us that the whole height of the repeat is 96, but when we drag it, the tooltip will tell us the individual height of one given row. So there I can see that it's 20 points high, 96 in total, 21, 101, you get the idea. That's how we're going to be able to do that in FileMaker. So that's going to be a good wrap-up question for this video. As with all of my content, I hope this is helping you out. If it is, then by all means, please give me the thumbs up. It helps me with getting a little bit more exposure within YouTube. Of course, you're going to be able to subscribe here on YouTube. If you're that interested in FileMaker, I have got a ton of information over at my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. Subscription is pretty inexpensive in all honesty. With regards to what you get, I release a video each week. That includes a file that you get, code that you can copy, examples that you can break down. Just head over to FileMakerMagazine.com and you can actually go to /subscribe, and that will give you information about getting a subscription on the magazine site there. So, as I like to say in all of my videos that I shoot for the magazine site, much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until I see you, it will be happy FileMaking. Let's get the subscribe up there, and there we go. Subscribe will come up right here for YouTube, not on the magazine site, and the next video will come up right here. So I hope you have a good day, and learned a lot more about FileMaker. All right, see you later.